Disclaimer: I am not an MRA, nor am I a misogynist. I don't hate, nor do I advocate for the hatred of or violence towards women. Women are not evil, they just are. Women adapt to the world that men create, so if we don't like the world we're living in, it's up to us to change it. Thank you. In this video, I'm going to put forward the case that a patriarchal society is the only form a functional and healthy society can assume in the long term. I will explain why the further society moves away from a patriarchal model, the further that society declines. I will do this in three ways, or by using three separate arguments: the scientific or biological argument, the moral or fairness argument, the economic or political argument. My purpose in this video isn't to affect any kind of political change. Although that would be desirable, it isn't possible. Women are over 50% of the population, and in a democratic society wherein women can vote, this kind of drastic political change is impossible. My purpose is to spread ideas and inform the men on whom the burden of rebuilding society will unavoidably fall. May you learn from our mistakes and not allow them to be repeated. The scientific or biological argument. Humans are a sexually dimorphic species. That simply means that male and female bodies have more differences than just reproductive organs. Men are taller, stronger, have larger and denser brains, and higher IQs than women. This isn't meant to demean women, it's simply a biological reality. There are species like gibbons that have no sexual dimorphism, and there are species wherein sexual dimorphism actually favors the female, such as the spotted hyena, wherein the female is the bigger, stronger, and more aggressive of the sexes. Each of these animal species form different kinds of societies based on the reproduction habits of that species, which is largely dictated by sexual dimorphism within that species. In order to understand society, we must understand reproduction, and thus we must understand sexual dimorphism. Humans happen to be a sexually dimorphic species that favors the male as the bigger and stronger gender. That's just the way it is, and although it's not fair, that's nature, and nature doesn't give a shit. Now let's define patriarchy, as it's a word that gets thrown around way too much without any context. While definitions differ slightly, it's generally understood that it's a system wherein men hold the power and women don't. What does this mean to hold the power? In animals, survival and reproduction are all that matters, so power within this context is defined by which gender controls the resources and reproduction of the species. When you look at different animals, it varies by species which gender controls the resources and reproduction of the social unit. Sometimes it's the male, sometimes it's the female, and sometimes it's shared. The form of the power structure of the species is influenced heavily by the presence or lack of sexual dimorphism, and which sex is favored by sexual dimorphism. What societal power structure do we see in animals wherein sexual dimorphism favors the male? It depends on the level of sexual dimorphism, but the two options are tournament and pair bonding. If humans were a tournament species, you would expect males to have larger skulls than females, to be bigger and stronger than females, to have shorter lifespans than females, and to compete with one another in order to acquire exclusive sexual access to multiple females. If humans were a tournament species, you would expect females to generally only give birth to one child at a time, because in a tournament species, the male is more likely to abandon the mother. If humans were a pair bonding species, males and females would have almost indistinguishable bodies aside from sex organs. Male and female skulls would be the same size and shape. Male and females would have the same height and strength, and have the same average lifespans. In a pair bonding species, males do half or more of the parenting. Females normally have multiple offspring, and mothers are more likely to abandon their children to the care of their father. Now, before we move on, some of you may be questioning my qualifications in addressing this issue at all. There are those who believe that only scientists and professors of evolutionary psychology should address these issues, and that's a fair point. Everything I've said in regards to sexual dimorphism in tournament versus pair bonding species are not my personal musings, but are paraphrased from the lectures of Stanford professor Robert Sapolsky. His background is neuroscience, neurobiology, biological anthropology, and primatology. The link to an applicable lecture on the subject is in the description, along with a time code to take you to the most relevant section of that lecture. Are humans a tournament or pair bonding species? From a physical perspective, it's clear humans are largely a tournament species, and in ancient and primitive societies this is still the case. In more civilized societies, institutions have been established to move us closer to a pair bonding species, most notably that of monogamous marriage. However, since this is strictly a biological argument, I'm going to put social institutions aside for now, and focus only on biological realities. And the biological reality is that humans are naturally a tournament mating species, and still are to a large degree, despite the social institutions we've built over the millennia. In tournament mating species, the sexually dimorphic sex holds the power in both survival and reproduction, and thus they ultimately control the society of that species. It's no different in species where the female has the advantage of sexual dimorphism, as they do not pair bond either, although the tournament often takes a darker tone, as the males are murdered or otherwise die either during or shortly after mating, such as with spiders, praying mantises, and bees. Again, the point is that the sexually dimorphic advantage grants control over survival and reproduction, and thus over society. If the species is sexually dimorphic and it favors the female, you have a matriarchal society. If it favors the male, you have a patriarchal society. You can confirm that human sexual dimorphism favors the male just by using common sense in your own eyes. And you can confirm that patriarchy is a natural form of society by looking throughout the animal kingdom and human history. So in conclusion, humans are a sexually dimorphic species wherein advantages favor the male. This being the case, the natural form that societies take given this dynamic is that the male controls reproduction. This control of reproduction extends into the extension of the family we know as society, which is known as patriarchy. The organization of society between the sexes has worked for countless millennia throughout the animal kingdom, including in humans for the vast majority of human history. Before I'm accused of making a naturalistic fallacy, I still have two more arguments, so let's move on to the fairness argument. The moral or fairness argument. The primary argument against a patriarchal society is that it oppresses women, and isn't fair. To analyze this criticism, it will be necessary to answer a larger and more fundamental question. Are the sexes equal? Most of you probably said yes, and you'd be wrong. Clearly the sexes aren't equal because, once again, humans are a sexually dimorphic species. Men are bigger, stronger, have larger and denser brains than women as well as higher IQs, and thus men and women are not equal. The foundation of feminism is built on the myth that the sexes are equal, and thus any disparities are the result of discrimination and sexism and must be rectified. However, I want you to unlearn all the bullshit you've been gaslighted with your entire life and really consider men and women as animals. Are men and women equal given the physical and mental differences between them? I can understand if this is an uncomfortable question to answer honestly, and many of you are probably thinking of several rationalizations in order to justify your doublethink. Let me debunk some common rationalizations right now just to move forward. Men and women need each other and thus are equal. Another variation of this is, men and women have different but equally important roles to play that benefit each other. This is not what equal means. But even if it did, it's not even true. I'll address why in a moment, but let's move on to another criticism. Everyone should be treated equally. Other variations include, everyone should have equal rights, or something along those lines. Again, that's not what equal means. Treating people equally doesn't mean they actually are equal, and rights are entirely legal constructs that don't actually exist in reality. The final criticism is some variation of the following egalitarian argument. Men and women are equal in worth and worthy of equal social standing. While worth is subjective to an individual, much like beauty or value, I will demonstrably prove that men contribute more to their relationships, families, and society in terms of concrete benefits, and thus men are objectively worth more as a whole. What do men contribute to women, and by extension to society? While I could list all the essential male-dominated professions to make a point, I can summarize it all by saying that men are the protectors and providers of women and society. Men do basically all the things. What do women contribute to men and by extension to society? They give birth to children. Notice I didn't say they make babies, because women can't make babies on their own, as they require a man's sperm. It takes a man and a woman to make a baby. The woman simply gives birth. That's literally all women uniquely contribute to society. That doesn't mean it's an insignificant contribution, but there is this quasi-religious worship of motherhood that overemphasizes this one contribution while severely diminishing the contributions of men in order to feed into this myth of equality. To demonstrate how easy giving birth is, I want you to Google "woman in coma gives birth" and just scroll through the pages to see how unexceptional this is. I stopped at about 50 unique articles. Now I want you to find a single incident of a man in a coma holding down a full-time job, building a house, operating a farm, or doing anything other than being in a coma. Obviously, men can't do much while they're unconscious, and yet women can accomplish their most significant contribution with so little effort that they don't even have to be conscious or aware of it. This makes them equal to men? Besides giving birth, women get a disproportionate amount of credit for being mothers. Children are not as much work as women let on. Sure, they can be annoying, but any job that you can do in your pajamas while watching TV is not that hard. And as further proof, most women openly admit that they would rather be stay-at-home mothers than hold down a full-time job. For those of you who still insist that being a mother is, quote, the hardest job on earth, babysitting is so easy, it's one of the few jobs that minors are allowed to legally do. The other so-called service women contribute to men is sex, but honestly, women only have sex when they want to, and they enjoy sex too, so how exactly is this a service to men? That's it. Women's contributions can be summed up as having sex, which is a mutual benefit and thus doesn't count as a contribution, motherhood, which is so easy we let children do it, and childbirth, which women can do while unconscious. So again, are the sexes equal? Are they contributing equally to each other and to society? Clearly not. So why have men historically made such a shitty deal, and done things like enter into a marriage or relationship with a woman when he is clearly contributing more? Why would men tolerate supporting another human being that contributes so little? In order to answer that question, let's change the context to two employees at a business. Meet Bob and Greg. Bob and Greg both work at the same company. Bob works full-time as well as overtime, while Greg works part-time in the evenings because he's also a student. When the boss reviews the hours worked and accomplishments, Bob is clearly contributing more to the company in terms of hours worked and productivity. Now I want you to imagine two different scenarios. Scenario 1. The boss calculates Bob and Greg's share of the profits they've generated from their combined work, splits it 50-50, and gives both Bob and Greg paychecks equaling the same amount, because he believes that both Bob and Greg are equally important. Scenario 2. The boss calculates both Bob and Greg's share of the profits based on the productivity of each employee. In this example, let's say Bob was responsible for 80% of the productivity based on his longer hours, and thus he would receive 80% of the profits and Greg would receive 20%. Which scenario would be fair to all parties? Clearly the second scenario, where both parties are compensated proportionally for their work. As Bob contributed more, he should receive more. Should Bob and Greg be paid equally, Bob would very likely quit and walk away from his job on the spot, as in that scenario an equal outcome ignores his disproportionate contribution. Greg wouldn't even be resentful for a smaller check compared to Bob because he knows he worked less hours and thus deserves less money. This doesn't mean that Greg isn't important and should be fired, it just means he contributed less and is thus entitled to less. Now let's return the context back to the relationship dynamic of men and women and apply what we've learned. We can quantify the economic contributions of men versus those of women because the actual services in question have value in the free market, allowing us to do a true apples-to-apples comparison in the real world outside of egalitarian philosophy. The US median income was last calculated in 2013 as $52,250 per year. So let's use that as men's economic contribution. And let's combine the median incomes of a daycare provider and a call girl in order to quantify the woman's economic contribution. The median income of a daycare provider was calculated to be $19,510 per year in 2012, according to Google. And according to Indeed.com, the average call girl salary is $29,000 a year in New York City. So the man brings in $52,250 in income, and the woman provides $48,510 in services. That's pretty close at first glance, but to be realistic, both of the women's roles are temporary, but not so for the man. The children will become more independent and eventually move out, so she will be effectively retired as a daycare provider in about 10 to 15 years based on the number of children she has. Also, the life of a call girl is even shorter lived. I don't think many men with a wife in their 40s would say that the sex is worth $29,000 a year. I don't know how much a GILF call girl goes for, but I'm pretty sure it's not that much. Meanwhile, the man will likely be increasing his salary year over year as he gains experience and moves up within the company or industry. By the time the children are independent and the sex has become stale, he'll be contributing more than ever while his wife is effectively retired. However, let's calculate lifetime contributions without making any of these adjustments for the male, just to prove a point. Let's calculate that the man earns the same $52,250 from the age of 35, the age he got married, to the age of 65 when he retires. Meanwhile, let's calculate the woman earning daycare worker wages for 15 years to symbolize her raising children from the age of 30, the age she got married, to 45. the year her last child became independent. For the call girl salary, let's use the ages of 30 to 50, because at age 50 she's going to enter menopause. The man's lifetime contributions between the ages of 35 and 65 at $52,250 a year equals $1,567,500. The woman's life contributions from a daycare worker from age 30 to 45 at $19,510 a year equals $292,650. A call girl aged 30 to 50 at $29,000 a year equals $580,000. Total contribution, $872,650, 55.7% that of the male. Again, there's nothing inherently wrong with this dynamic, just like there's nothing wrong with Bob and Greg working different amounts of hours. It's only when both are considered equal and compensated equally that the dynamic becomes unfair. So how do we compensate fathers and husbands appropriately as a society in recognition for their higher contributions? We compensate them by giving them greater authority within their relationships and families, which is known as a patriarchy. In a patriarchal system, the man is able to keep his property and children if the marriage ends, and have legal authority over his wife and children if they remain together, and thus he controls the relationship. This compensates him for his additional contributions by giving him certain assurances and benefits. In modern times, especially since the 1970s, the authority of fathers and husbands has been absolutely destroyed. It is now mothers who are guaranteed custody of children under the tender years doctrine, and through child support and alimony, women are also entitled to a man's assets and earnings, sometimes for the rest of her life. The result is a declining marriage and fertility rate, and women wondering where all the good men have gone. Again, whichever sex controls reproduction controls the family and thus controls society. Women currently have full reproductive rights, while men have none. Women are granted automatic custody of children in divorce, not men. There can be no doubt that this is not a patriarchy but a matriarchy. There's even a feminist hashtag campaign going on right now called Give Your Money to Women, where feminists are demanding that men simply hand over their money to women for no other reason than that they're women. It would be funny if the consequences weren't so tragic. In conclusion, a patriarchal system only appears to favor men if you falsely believe that the sexes are equal and contribute equally to one another, the family, and society as a whole. In actuality, the increased authority of men is simply just compensation for them due to their disproportionate contributions. This is no more a case of female oppression than paying an employee less money for fewer hours worked. Finally, as male authority is diminished by society chasing the phantom of gender equality, the result is actually gender inequality at the expense of men. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself, so let's move on to the economic and practical argument. The economic or practical argument. At the end of the day, we have to ask the question of which system works best, which system provides successful outcomes, and which system benefits the greatest amount of people. Again, we must start with a basic acknowledgement of sexual dimorphism and the damage caused by trying to fix biology and make the sexes equal. Feminist programs that attempt to lift women up to the level of men fail spectacularly. For example, the Equal Pay Act was signed into law in 1963 in the US and in 1970 in the UK. This law made it illegal to pay women less for the same work or discriminate based on gender. This has effectively evened the playing field for both men and women, and over 40 years later, men are still earning more. And even men entering female-dominated industries are overtaking their female co-workers. Feminists have come up with theories such as the glass ceiling for women or the glass escalator for men, but the reality is that women are not being restricted by men, but by their own biology. Women will never be as good as men because sexual dimorphism favors the male in humans. And when men and women are allowed to compete on an even playing field, men win. The only way to achieve gender equality isn't to build women up, but to tear men down to the level of women through discrimination and lower wages. Feminist social planners assume that women will take over men's roles, but that doesn't happen. Women often go to college and obtain advanced degrees, only to drop out of the workforce within their first 5 years in the industry in order to become stay-at-home mothers. They may eventually return, but many do not. 43% of women don't return to work after having a child, and only 40% of those, 17% overall, will ever return to full-time work. 77% of married women say they don't even want to return to full-time work after having a child. Compare that to how many men quit their jobs when a baby is born, or switch from full-time to part-time work. Now consider which situation is better for companies, taxpayers, the economy, and society. Now the socialists out there are screaming that the answer is paid maternity leave or free daycare. But that ignores the economic consequences of increased taxes or labor costs, which will disproportionately be borne by men, and that's the bottom line. Since equal opportunity favors men, the only way to achieve gender equality is to tear men down, and treat them unequally in order to benefit women. Eventually, men will get sick of being exploited and walk away, both economically and in regards to women. What does this look like? Look at Japan and the herbivore man phenomenon. 75% of Japanese men identify as herbivore men, 80% of which live happily on less than $20,000 a year. For those unfamiliar with herbivore men, they are men who have walked away from marriage and relationships. 75% of Japanese men identify with this label, and 80% of them have further walked away from the materialism and corporate exploitation that often comes as the byproduct of marriage and relationships. Now the Japanese government is in trouble because they need these men to be working and paying taxes so that they can pay their retirement benefits on the third of the population that's over 60. However, the men have checked out, and the government's trump card is to expand government daycare to get more women into the workforce. But you can't get out of a hole by digging deeper, and you can't pay off welfare debt by increasing welfare benefits. This is the inevitable result of a feminist matriarchy. By attacking men and tearing them down to the level of women, the society is attacking its own foundation. It is the men that build and maintain society, after all. Even if women did somehow miraculously become as comparatively productive as men, fertility rates would plummet, meaning that society would just slowly die out rather than collapse quickly. Either scenario leads to a failed society, either economically, demographically, or both. Thus, a patriarchal society makes practical and economic sense. It allows men to do what they do best, unencumbered by social planners trying to make women equal to men. Men will be much happier and productive at their jobs, and 77% of married women confirm women don't even want to work full-time once they have children anyway. This doesn't mean women should be barred from working if they choose, but employers shouldn't be forced to hire them, or forced to give them additional benefits they wouldn't give a man, thus increasing their labor costs and passing the costs on to men or society at large. If they are less productive, or increase the employer's labor costs due to increased benefits, they should be paid less as a result, and everyone should be okay with this. If you squeeze men too hard, they will do what the herbivore men in Japan are doing and walk away, both from the women and the companies that are exploiting them. If you think that sort of thing will never happen outside of Japan, I advise you to look into a little acronym called MGTOW or MGTOW, also known as Men Going Their Own Way. It's already begun. As I've said before, my purpose in this video isn't to affect any kind of political change. That's not going to happen with women being the voting majority. However, if nothing is changed, society will collapse under its own weight and return to patriarchy. I don't expect anything to change until then, and again, my purpose here is merely to inform the men on whom the burden of rebuilding society will unavoidably fall. May you learn from our mistakes and not allow them to be repeated.